Colombini, psychologist and tech leadership coach, and this is my podcast, TechMinds Insights. My mission is to be the change agent for tech leaders grappling with communication issues, imposter syndrome, burnout, and the complexity of the tech leadership roles. In this show, I interview leaders and consultants working in the tech space to provide you with real-world insights into the challenges of leadership. If you want to be part of this show or have questions you want me to ask my guests, just send me a message. And today I have Peter. Peter, please, can you introduce yourself and say your last name, because I'm super awkward to try it for myself.
Certainly, yeah, it's a tricky name. I'm Peter Schawacker. If you say it with your best German accent, it works. So I've been in cybersecurity for about 25 years. IT for about 30. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Nearshore Cyber. We're based in Oaxaca, Mexico, and in New Hampshire in the United States, and we provide cybersecurity services, recruiting, consulting, and virtual CISO services for clients in the United States and a little bit of UK.
This is amazing. And for our audience to understand, I met Peter because our posts resonated a lot with each other, and I found a lot of commonalities among our lines of thinking about leadership. And I came to find out that Peter also has a podcast called Queer in Cyber, and I just saw two of the first episode, and I was in love with it. I was like, oh my God, I have to stop now because I have to do something, but I wanted to return because my first thought was that I'm going to jump in, check what it is, just to have a better understanding of what we can discuss. But I'm certainly going to start following it because the conversations are really interesting, really deepening and challenging. So Peter, can you tell us about this project a little bit? What's your intention with this project?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just for me. I mean, I'm bi. I was chased into the closet when I was 16 under credible death threats. Stayed in the closet until I was about 47 and living in New York, and was I had a pretty easy time of it because I was already successful as a professional. I came out to the company that I was working for as I was hired. So in the announcement of the company, I made a point of asking for my boss to say, to put a line in the announcement saying, and Peter is queer. And it was the response for me being in that position was positive, very positive. There were people in the company who were like, they were grateful, found that there were people who were closeted, people who were semi-so. And I found that just being out was really powerful given the position that I was in as the only member of the executive team or of any executive team that I'd known since other than Tim Cook from Apple, who was out. But, coming out is a gradual process and it happens in fits and starts. When I started Nearshore Cyber about 2 years ago, one of my goals was to ensure that I never had to work in another toxic company, and that if it would be my fault, because the worst part was blaming somebody else. And so one of the things I had to do was get really, really candid about me, about, my status in the industry and as a member of the LGBTQ community. And we also, there are people in our community of practice. Like we do a lot of education events and mentoring and things like that. We have a really active Discord. And a lot of people in that are trans and queer, various types, and non-gender conforming, including, employees. And so, also the fact that we're in Mexico and we do business on a cross-border basis means that we're always trying to destigmatize Mexico. There's a lot of cybersecurity talent here, but people still particularly Americans think of Mexico as like tequila and sombreros and ponchos. And so part of the work that we do is about destigmatizing Mexico and kind of punching through. Like we are unabashedly representatives of Mexican cyber. And there's not a lot of leadership here doing that, or, in the States looking this way. And we've experienced some success. I take the same approach with gender. I don't want to hide. I refuse to. I can't live that way. Right. And after 30 something years of denying that aspect of myself, I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. And so the two the two kind of, let's call them work streams, or go work at, they go in parallel. The podcast, I'd always wanted to do a podcast because I love podcasts. I wanted to do it since like 2006, but I didn't have a reason to do one. It's hard work. And I finally found that I had a reason with Queer in Cyber.
And it's a very beautiful mission that you have there. And going back to what you said about setting the example when you came to this position of leadership. So I think this is something that worries me about leadership in tech, not only in cybersecurity, but also in other areas of technology, where people are really analytical, introverted, and usually they don't have, it's not easy for them to talk to people, to talk about feelings. So this kind of personality usually, like, if I cannot solve that person's problem, then I'll let it be. So if I cannot talk about the queerness, if I cannot talk about this, I'll let it pass by. But they usually are, that doesn't mean that they are really biased about it, but sometimes they don't know how to react. So what were the reactions that you had from your peers, from other leaders, that you think you would love to see spread around, and those that you thought, those reactions that you thought, guys, please don't do this, the do's and don'ts when another leader comes out of the closet?
There are three reactions. The first one is that I don't see the people who just disappear, right? I don't think there are many people who are really put off to that extent. I don't know. I mean, it's a data set I don't have by definition. And a common negative reaction, and it's a mild one, but a telling one, is when I say, like, I have this podcast and it's called Queer in Cyber, and people are like, huh? And they get nervous a lot of the time at first. It's funny, I was invited to be a guest on a podcast about a month ago, and I mentioned this at the end, and the person interviewing me, the host of the podcast, was like visibly uncomfortable by this. I'm married, I have a wife and I have a kid. I think they'd walk past, so it's like, well, this feels very normal. And then he heard that, and I could tell, like, this podcast is not going to get published, and it wasn't.
Really?
Yeah. Now, it was a new podcast, and it was a little bit rough in the production, and maybe that was the reason. I don't know, but I do know that, like, at first I would say to I'm a member of various sort of masterminds and groups and things like that, and I would say, like, look, that's this Queer in Cyber thing, and I'm bi, and then people would, like, you could see it, you could see the discomfort over, and like feeling like disrupted in terms of perception of me and themselves, and like, how does this change this relationship? But then things would settle, and the straight people were like, you got a lot of guts, how can I help? And usually the answer is like, well, if you know queer people, send them to us. I know you can't reach out to them directly. You can't say, hey, I think, you gay employee, lesbian, co-worker, whatever, like, you can't really do that. Unless you're like, people have to come out to each other. It's just like important protocol. But people are sort of warmed up to it. LGBTQ people, queer people have been really grateful. There's a little bit of suspicion that this is some kind of like DEI play, but we're not charging for it. I don't charge for any community events, and we're pretty vocal about the fact that we're always looking for volunteers and helpers. There's no sponsor. I mean, we might get a sponsor because it starts to get expensive to host it, but so far, like, we've been able to do this with not much money. So because we're not incorporated, like, this is like the marketing arm of Nearshore Cyber, which is my company, because we don't follow the usual pattern of like forming a nonprofit corporation and a board and all that, and like fundraising. Like, people trust it. And so, we're the only people who, as far as I know, taken this approach. Like, we're the only Queer Cyber podcast. We're actually not a podcast yet. We're still working on it. We're a YouTube channel.
Podcast, just the channel that you're delivering in.
It's like, you can't get on your podcast reader, right? People are like, can I get on the podcast? Well, okay. It's also a video thing. So the idea is to be really out. like visibly, literally visibly out. So there are, us talking heads, and there are, anywhere between 2 and 5 of us on this thing. And it's important that people see us. One of our goals, and the way we know if we've achieved our mission, is if people no longer need courage to come out. It takes a lot of courage to do it. And some people are in a position where this cannot, because the economy is a wreck. Don't believe the numbers. The cybersecurity job market is awful in the United States right now, and people are really scared. My response to that is, if you don't like queer people, I don't want to work with you. I can't work with you. You won't be happy. And I'm hoping that there is solidarity in the community. We're, starting to see evidence of that, and that there are enough allies that are like, I want somebody who has some courage. And
Yeah, I was thinking about what you said about what is the responsibility of a leader in this case, when you really want in your heart to include people, and suppose you don't know how to do it, you feel awkward about approaching it in any way because there are wrong ways. And then suddenly, I think leaders should just realize that they just have to create the safe space for this to be talked about. So create something that's easy for you to talk. So if a leader who is straight and want to include this vocabulary and this issue in their topics, so how can they use your podcast, for instance? So how would you advise them to bring this subject to the table and make it a safe space for people to talk about this, to come out?
Well, first recognize there's no safety. I mean, the world's a dangerous place, and it's getting more so. And we talk about this a lot. We haven't talked about it on the podcast too much yet. But one of our participants is about my age, from originally from the UK, and he talks about the UK in the '80s under Thatcher. And he and I remember the AIDS crisis. We remember the Reagan era, and this is the 8th of May 2024, and much of the world looks awful lot like the late '70s. And we know what happened in the '80s. Like, I remember when Trump was elected, the day he was elected, a few hours after the shock started to settle in, people said, "Oh, well, we survived the Reagan era. We'll survive this." I was like, no, like, we didn't all survive the Reagan era. A lot of us died. Now, so here's the thing: the leadership is actually very simple. To lead is to go first. But going first means that you are taking risk on behalf of others. Like, when I go first, that means that, there's this wonderful quote I saw in a museum here in Oaxaca next to a photo of a fellow. If you look at my LinkedIn, you might find it. And he says, I bear the light so that others won't stumble.
Mm-hmm. So
that's all we can do.
To make the path safe. So, like, but what does that mean in terms of let's think about a straight leader that's a white male straight leader who is all in the heteronormative rules within that, but he still wants to provide that. He doesn't know it's not part of it. What would be their first step?
You have to respect other people's risk valuations. Like, we actually can't make it safe. What we can do is help people understand what the risks really are, and maybe provide some support emotionally. What I really want to see happen is economic solidarity. So a lot of what I do is recruiting, professional services too, consulting, things like that. But much of it is recruiting. And I am looking for companies that who actually appreciate LGBTQ people in cyber. The premise of Queer in Cyber is that at the intersection of queerness and cybersecurity is a kind of common cultural, cognitive perspective or position that actually, because I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, like my best employees are gay," or whatever. I'm like, well, if that's true, why? Like, what is special about queer people, and when I say queer, I mean LGBT, you like the whole alphabet thing, and non-gender conforming or gender non-conforming. Still new to this, but like, what is it? What do we have that is, especially what's not rooted in oppression? Like being members of an oppressed class that has to hide, and to some of us can hide for long periods of time. Like that confers certain benefits in terms of skill and capability. But what if we weren't an oppressed class? Like, what is it about us that lends itself to the cybersecurity profession? What is it about cybersecurity people that makes them cybersecurity people? So like in the next episode, we're going to not talk so much about gender, but talk about cybersecurity as the cybersecurity mindset, the hacker ethos, that way of being in the world, like in like a Heidegger sense. Like, what is that? And then we bring them together and see where it lines up.
Wow, that's gonna be super fun. I'm looking forward to that. But I think that even if you don't get the oppression on the side, that's what makes queer people today. Like that what builds you, culturally builds you together with everything that you have in uniqueness individually. I think that people are built, constructed in this society, like women is constructed also in society, and it differs from society to society if you're passable or if you're not passable. And one of the things that I imagine, this is like a theory on my mind, and I would love to hear from you, is that usually people in tech are not good at organizational awareness. So they're very technical in their approach, they have a very expert action logic. So they assess merits and they assess and decide things based on technical qualities. And on the other hand, I think that even if you are an analytical person working in the tech space, working in the cyberspace, and you are queer, you cannot allow yourself not to have this organizational awareness and actually understand how decisions are made. Like you have to be careful stepping your way to understand if you can trust that person. So in a way, you have to develop this organizational awareness, this understanding of how things work in reality beyond the speech. What do you think about this?
I want to address a kind of misconception of how cybersecurity people are. Yes, there is the technical, but cybersecurity people used to be thought of as like the IT people who could not leave well enough alone and were constantly asking annoying questions and had like hygiene issues and wore soup in their beards. Like that was kind of and to some degree that was true. Like a lot of us got into cyber because it was valued and nobody understood it, but we did, and we could kind of like get away with being us. And back in the early days, like before the internet, there were bulletin board services. Bulletin board services were, you dial in and you were only in that. Maybe there were gateways to this thing called the internet, or no web browsers, and people could hide behind that. There's the old saying like, nobody on the internet knows you're a dog. Well, nobody on your internet needs to know that you are disfigured or disabled or have like anxiety that keeps you from being able to go out, or old or queer or whatever. And so there was a culture that included hackers and information security people from back when we called it that. And that created kind of a door for certain people to come into this industry called information security, now cybersecurity. Not that information security doesn't exist. We broke up the category, but we were valued for our abilities. We were valued for our willingness or sort of the like urge to raise issues and sometimes even solve them. And we were also used to being abused. We were used to being ignored. And we were used to being held to account for things that we didn't have resources to deal with. That has continued. But what happened was the cybersecurity business got so flush with cash that it attracted a lot of people who, cis people, non-queer people. And so the labor market in the past 6 months has collapsed. And cybersecurity people, there are more of them. And the people who are sort of social outsiders one way or another are no longer coveted resources. And so it's getting harder and harder to find someone who will overlook your gender, your disability, your, what people call neurodiverse or whatever, which to
Mhm.
me, like, who isn't post-COVID? And with this economy, when we could talk about COVID too and its effect, but yeah, the world, we've gone back to something similar to what we had at the very beginning. And the solution is we have to like help each other in terms of being better professionals, in terms of being better at networking, right? I have lots of opportunities for people to network with each other. Very few people take me up on it. It's shocking. People are like, I don't know how
Yeah,
to network. I'm like, here, like, come to this, come
no,
to that.
one
Yeah.
of the things that I do with my community of clients, so most of my clients are tech leaders, as I mentioned to you, and leaders in the tech space. So what I'm trying to teach them is how to network. So this is super important. And most of them didn't ever felt the need to do so, because like there were companies going after them all the
Yeah.
time, and they didn't have to worry about what everyone else working in any other industry had to worry about, like having your LinkedIn profile or actually networking. I was listening to I think it was podcast 1 of the Queer, and it called my attention the way you mentioned this difference that when you're everything that you have to go through on recruitment processes, and how much bias is still there in recruitment. This is a shame. This is a real shame that you have to go through all this. But in the end, it seems like each one of you have a different strategy to deal with that, right?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that biases are sort of what the mind is made of. There's
Yeah.
this idea that like bias is a bad thing. And like there's a wonderful book by a guy named Richards J. Hoyer, Heuer. If somebody wants to find it, hit me on LinkedIn. But it's called The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. It's a guide to cognitive biases and making decisions in the absence of complete information for intelligence analysts. Anybody can get it. It's like available from the CIA website. It's a great piece of writing. Actually, I've actually used it to train security operations centers and threat intelligence analysts. But in it, he talks about the various kinds of biases and how we use them to make decisions when we're not going to get all the information. And so when we talk about like bias in the recruiting process, there are biases that will get us what we need and what we don't need. Like I have a strong bias toward people like real cyber, as I call it. Like this is why I started thinking about like cybersecurity as a gender. Like there are people who will put in the work, suffer for years because they love it. It's about desire, right? Gender and sexuality is about desire. Being a professional in your field is about desire, and desire that is strong enough and has to enable you to persist through the difficulty. Yeah, we get paid sometimes. Sometimes some of us get paid very well. I've made a good living at this. Who knows how long that lasts? But my bias is toward, right, in favor of such people. I also have a certain bias in favor of outcasts, of people who don't look, like, the way that the VCs who came from Yale and Stanford want you to look like. I'm biased in favor of people who've survived difficulty. I'm a sober alcoholic. It's actually 18 years ago today I got sober.
The
Just as
underdog.
it happens. Yeah. So
The
I have,
underdog.
so
But
anyway, those are my thoughts on biases.
yeah, and I agree with you. We all have bias. I think that it will all start by like self-awareness and self-assessing to understand what your bias are. If you answer that I have no bias, it's just because you don't know them.
Right.
So you must be aware of them. If you cannot pick 2 or 3, then you still have a huge blind spot where you have to look at. So you have to take the assumption that you have blind spots and that you have biases. So try to figure out what they are. I think that when you cross this first step, it's easier to understand how you're going to bring this topic to the table and how you can make people comfortable talking about it. One of the things I would recommend to people listening to us, like straight people who want to welcome other queer people to talk about this and be more open about this, I think it's actually listen to podcasts, listen to queer people talking, get used to it. If you don't know the vocabulary, it's because you're not out there looking for that. You're in your bubble. You're in your algorithmic bubble, which only feeds you with the vocabulary that you're already used to, that you're already in your comfort zone. So if you want to get out of this comfort zone, you have to be proactive and intentional about listening to these people, listening to whatever people would think you have to integrate in your minds. And in this case, I would recommend your podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, and I would add to that we deal a lot with people who were sort of allies and who wanted to be on the show. I'm like, no, you're not gonna be on the show.
Yeah.
You can be in this channel on Discord, you can comment on the LinkedIn page, but you won't, like, it's no. And they're like, well, why do you want to exclude people? I'm like, because you have everything else as straight people. Like, the world is your safe space. And it's not about safety, by the way. Like, we're sticking our necks out by doing this. What we want to do is have the kinds of conversations that we don't have when allies or whatever other people in the room, and just like know that you're never going to really understand us. Like, I live in Mexico. I married into a Mexican family. I've been here for 3.5 years. Before this, I was in New York. Before that, I was in Mexico City. I have this sort of on and off again, like, thing with Mexico. Maybe I'll be a citizen someday. I will never be Mexican. I will never know what it's like to it always hits me when I'm at a party and I see people dancing. The dance is that they danced when they were 3. I'm like, I will never know those steps. I will never know how to move like that. And people are like, come on, dance. I'm like, no, right? No, thank you, right? And in the same way that I will never be black. I don't know what it is like to be black. I can kind of get it. I can read To Be Boys. I can read, like, James Baldwin is one of my heroes, but I will never know what it's like to be James Baldwin. And straight people will never know what it's like to, the same way. Like, I'm a sober alcoholic. Like, I'm a bad alcoholic, right? No, unless you've gone through that, you won't know, and that's fine. Like, we're not going to, I'm not going to condemn someone who hasn't had my perspective, because how could they? And so much of what we need is love, and that love is rooted in a willingness to not know and not understand, and still take action.
To take action. I think that that's the perfect ending for this sentence, because it's not allowing yourself to stay in your comfort zone in all the areas, especially if you're hurting someone else. So I think that it's time that we are not just, I'm not a homophobic. That's not enough anymore. We have to be anti-homophobic. So
yeah, we have
cannot,
the same way that we have to be anti-racist,
anti-sexist. So I think there are many ways you can do that. You don't have to be aggressive to be that, but you can say, oh, I'm not comfortable with this conversation, or I think there's another point of view to this. So, or you just cannot participate in that conversation and leave. I think there are many stages for you to do that. I don't think that there's a right behavior, but if that's, if you're not feeling well with that, if you don't agree with these biases and how people are excluded for them, you should take at least one action. So what is the first micro step that you can take towards that? So who can you give voice to if you're not ready to be yourself, the one talking about it? So, and regarding what you said also about being, I'll never be a Portuguese person. I'm Brazilian. I live here in Portugal. And you know what? One of the most interesting things that happened when I started working with Americans is that I was raised as a white person in Brazil. So in Brazil, I'm white. But when I was raised as white. But when I joined groups of white Americans, they consider me the inclusion part, the different person, the not Latin because I'm not Spanish, but exotic, at least exotic, and that's super weird for me. But that doesn't mean that I understand what racism is like, because I was not raised like that. So it's like you really will never be in that position, even if you're taking out of your preview of your culture and of the way people see you, and people start seeing you differently. But you have a different background. I wasn't raised as an excluded person. I was raised in the privileged group. So this makes a lot of difference in the construction of our personalities, of our egos, and how we deal with issues later on.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is when people say that they are, in one way or another, members of an oppressed class, take them seriously, believe them. I mean, I've had, people who claim to be allies in one breath, and the next breath say, I don't really, I'm not racist. I don't see how, queer people are oppressed. I'm like, you're not an ally if you really believe that that's the case. And if you can say that, it's because you have been brought up in as part of the system that benefits somehow from that oppression. I am apparently, what people think that I'm a straight white man, tall in Oaxaca, right? I walk into places and heads turn, and I get more respect than my wife does and the rest of her family, because I'm the gringo. Real, and that's the first thing, is to recognize that. And it goes on from there. There's no one thing to do. I think, if you want to take that challenge seriously, I guess that is a challenge I'm making. Read James Baldwin. Read Fire Next Time. For starters, it's a collection of essays. Wonderful stuff.
To ask you for a book recommendation. Can you repeat what the book is?
Yeah, The Fire Next Time.
The Fire Next Time.
Yeah, I get goosebumps just saying it. It's an extremely important book. And Baldwin was way ahead of his time. So yeah, James Baldwin.
Oh,
and another good one to read, the next thing would be, the solution to all this stuff is love. There's a book by Bell Hooks called All About Love. It's available in English and it's available in Spanish. It is absolutely superb, because in it she describes love as a set of ethics and actions. I actually have a tattoo. There's an extract from the book that says respect, honesty, kindness, commitment, open and honest communication, affection, caring, and trust. And I have that tattoo because I need a reminder on my arm. And that's it's distilled from that book, but just spectacular. I think there's an audio version too for those who have trouble, with text. So
I think thank you for these tips. I think this is amazing. I also advise people to look for help. So if you are a leader, you want to take this challenge, you want to take this first step, and either if you're queer or not, maybe you are and you haven't had the guts to speak out, you don't know how to assess the environment, talk to someone, reach out to someone, listen to people who already done that, to different kind of people, and respect your moment, right? So respect what you can do, but take action in one direction. Is it if it's asking for help or actually doing something that can help someone else?
Right on.
So I'm going to wrap it up here. I think that it was an amazing conversation. I loved having this conversation. I will keep listening to your podcast, which is super enlightening for me. And I hope I get a queer client. I've never had a queer client, someone that openly queer that asked for my help, and I'm super willing to help anyone who looks for me. And if people want to reach out to you, Peter, how can they do that?
I'm extremely easy to find on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yes, your last name is super easy. Just as mine, just like mine. I'm the only one, I'm the only one. I'm the only Carol Palombini on LinkedIn.
Palombini is a really cool name, I got to tell you, and it looks cool in text. It makes for a good logo. So, congratulations on that.
And it's easy to say. I don't know if it's easy for everyone, but it's kind of easy, right, to pronounce.
Yeah.
So, okay, Peter, thank you very much again, and we'll keep in touch. And if you want to be part of this podcast, just send me a message, and we will arrange everything. And I'll see you, everyone, on our next episode.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Carolina. Obrigado.